back to another weekly wrap-up video of the Delaware General Assembly, this being week 6 of the legislative year. Again, my name is Matt Revel. I'm Director of Policy and Communications for the Delaware State Senate Republican Caucus, and I'm again joined by Senator Pettyjohn from the 19th District, hailing out of the great city of Georgetown. Senator, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks, Matt.
Great. Again, there were a number of pieces of legislation that hit the floor of the Senate that was in committees this week, most of which that were on the floor, much like last week, they were all important, but they weren't, I guess, controversial, if you will. Yeah. Most of which are straightforward, and we'll include the link to the Delaware General Assembly website where you can find all of that important information about any piece of legislation that comes through this building and is in committees also. But did want to touch on 3 more this week that I know has drawn a lot of public interest, particularly from our constituents. The first bill I wanted to touch on this week, Senate Bill 5, which implements a automatic voter registration system.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that, and actually how does that differ from the current system that's in place?
So Senate Bill 5 is for automatic voter registration. So the process that we have here in Delaware now is a very comprehensive process. If you want to register to vote, there's lots of opportunities for you to do so. You can do it at the Division of Motor Vehicles when you go in and get a driver's license or change anything on your driver's license, your address, anything like that, or renew. You can change your registration or register to vote if you're not already registered. If you take part in some of our social service programs here in Delaware, they can register you to vote there as well. You can go to the Department of Elections in all 3 counties. In fact, Newcastle County, I think, has 2 locations that you can go to register to vote. You can do it on your computer. You can do it on your smartphone. You can go to one of the many voter registration drives that we have during the summertime. They have one at the Delaware State Fair. A lot of community events, the Department of Elections or other groups will come out and do voter registration drives. So there are a lot of opportunities for an individual, if they want to register to vote, to go and register to vote in Delaware. The key difference in Senate Bill 5 is what will happen is it will change it from a voluntary process to an automatic process. So if you go to any of these state service centers or do any of the social service programs, they will automatically register you to vote. Renewing your driver's license, getting a driver's license. If you're not already registered, they will register you to vote. After that process takes place, my understanding is you'll receive a piece of information in the mail, and if you do not want to be registered, you have to opt out and then return that to the Department of Elections. I believe during that time you can also choose your political party as well. So it is a very different type of system where currently you actually have to take the step to say I want to register to vote. This one, you get registered, they put you in the system whether you want to or not.
Now obviously we know there are some folks out there who just do not want to register.
Right.
And whenever they hear automatic voter registration, I'm sure a flag kind of goes off. So you touched on it in your previous answer, but have we gotten a clear answer on the process?
I don't think so.
Right.
And I actually have heard from somebody who lives in my district who their religious sect tells them not to register to vote. So they're very concerned about this, that they're going to be automatically registered and they have to opt out. They don't want to be registered to vote. They don't want an automatic system. And this is a little troublesome that, let's say that piece of mail gets lost in the mail, whether it's to them or back to the Department of Elections and they're in there and registered to vote. There are some people that don't want their information, their address information, really accessible to a public database. And voter registration records are public. There are companies that go out there and harvest that information and then sell that information back out. You could have a number of reasons why somebody doesn't want to be on that voter registration list. Under this new program, they will be put in there unless they actively say they don't want to be registered to vote, and assuming that all the mail gets to them and then back to the Department of Elections in time, they could be in that system if there's a problem with that.
Well, it's definitely a piece of legislation we're going to be keeping an eye on. It's currently tentatively slated to be on the agenda sometime next week.
Okay.
So, like I said, as soon as that information is available, it'll be posted on the Delaware General Assembly website. But wanted to move on to two more bills.
Okay.
Some variations of them had been introduced in the past. First one is Senate Bill 3, and the next one be Senate Bill 6. But Senate Bill 3 implements a permit to purchase.
Okay.
Obviously, we know there are many organizations out there who have taken very staunch stances against this, and then also some that do support it. But what are your thoughts?
The permit to purchase bill, it is a long process, and I think by statute it could take up to 30 days for somebody to receive this permit from the state in order for them to exercise a constitutional right that we have here in Delaware. It would start with a class, fingerprinting, a notification to law enforcement where they live that this person is seeking a permit to purchase a firearm. In some ways, it's actually a little bit more involved than our concealed carry process, which you need to take a class, you need to get 5 references, you need to put an advertisement in some type of newspaper, and then get permission from a judge here in Delaware, because we are a may issue versus a shall issue state for concealed carry. So once that process is done, you get a card that you can go ahead and take and get your firearm. Part of what happens as well is this bill really starts to build a registry of who has a firearm and what type of firearms they have as well. Again, in the state of Delaware, we have a constitutional right to keep and bear arms. An individual has a right to keep and bear arms for the protection of self, family, home, and state, and for hunting and recreational use. That is in our Constitution, Article 1, Section 20. And there is a concern that this bar to exercise your constitutional right, because you have to take a class, you have to go through and I don't think it's been set yet, but there's probably going to be an application fee for the firearm or for the permit to purchase. You're putting a bar to ownership. The state is imposing these restrictions on exercising that constitutional right. So there are a lot of concerns with this bill, and one of the concerns even comes from some individuals I've talked to in the domestic violence community, and that is, if there's a person who has been in a relationship with a partner, they are fearful for their lives. They get a protection from abuse, but that's just a piece of paper. If they want to go out and purchase a firearm for protection, if they already don't have a permit, they're going to have to go through this long process in order to get a permit to be able to protect themselves. And there's significant concerns with this. And quite frankly, the question has come up, well, with our current background check system, when you run through the National Instant Criminal Check System, if you're a person prohibited, you'll get denied. If there's something in your file that even you don't know about, an old crime that was committed, or possibly a warrant or an indictment that you've not been served yet, it's going to flag those things. We already have those checks in place. The people who want to get a firearm illegally that aren't eligible to get a firearm aren't going to go through the permit to purchase process anyway. They're going to buy it in the same ways that they're doing now.
I want to circle back to the financial aspect of this. Obviously, like you said, the legislation doesn't necessarily set out a particular application fee, but
right.
We can probably guess there will be one. So, but even that, not even in the equation right now, you're talking about having to go take classes and various other things. That's hundreds of dollars prior to even purchasing a firearm. Do you think this is probably going to be a deterrent to the law-abiding citizen? Yeah,
it absolutely will be. Anytime that you make exercising a right more difficult, it discourages people from actually exercising that right. There's a famous saying, a right delayed is a right denied, because if they're not able to exercise that right at the point in time that they choose to exercise that right, then they're being denied until they jump through these processes. So it is very concerning from that standpoint, from the financial standpoint, for people who may not be able to afford. They may be able to afford just enough for the gun. Now they're going to have to they're going to have to save up for longer in order to be able to purchase a firearm to protect themselves. It's usually, and again, it's usually not the ones. It's usually the ones who want to protect themselves that do it the legal way. If somebody wants to commit a crime, they're not going to go through the process of going through the proper checks in order to receive to get a firearm transferred to them in the first place.
Not to mention, this has to be renewed.
Yes, there is a renewal. It has to be renewed on a periodic basis as well.
The other bill that came out within the same day was Senate Bill 6, which sets a magazine capacity limit, but also implements a buyback program for those magazines that exceed, I believe it's a 17 round limit. What are your thoughts on that particular piece of legislation?
Well, I find it funny that they assume that there's not very many of these in Delaware. Looking at the fiscal note and at a $10 per unit buyback, which first is well below the market value of those. Even trading on eBay, getting a new one, they could be starting at $30 all the way up, depending on what it is. So one, that's a laughable that they're saying they're worth $10. They're worth a whole lot more than that. So that brings up a question. If you're not going to allow them to existing ownership to be grandfathered in, people are going to be forced to turn it over to the government for less value than it's actually worth. So that brings up a concern first and foremost. Second, again, we kind of go back to the point that if they implement this and it's upheld by the courts here in Delaware, then really it's only going to be the criminals that are going to have magazines that exceed that capacity. So if you're a law-abiding citizen, have a 17-round magazine in your gun that you use for personal protection, somebody comes in and wants to do a home invasion or something where you get into a defensive position, they're committing a criminal act as it is. They probably don't care what their magazine capacity is, but you as a law-abiding citizen trying to follow the rules, have a 17-round magazine, you're possibly and very likely going to be at a disadvantage right away. So I mean, it is a very serious concern that this could put people who are law-abiding citizens in a disadvantage in those types of situations, imperil their safety, and make them more susceptible to harm.
So then that begs the question, Senator, what's the standard capacity on a handgun?
It depends. There are some that are some of the larger caliber handguns that are below, 10 rounds or so. But then you get into some of the smaller, the full-size handguns, some of the smaller calibers, 9mm, 17-ish. But you get into even smaller calibers than that, like 380. Then you could have more than that. It depends on the build of the gun, the size of the handgun, and how many rounds they can put into that magazine. And I will say that with your smaller caliber handguns, you kind of want more capacity in there because they have less stopping power. Not everybody can handle a large 40 a 40 caliber, a 40 Smith & Wesson type of handgun for personal defense. They require something smaller. Sometimes, and I've seen handguns that are 22 caliber, which are really, really small, and you can fit a whole lot into the handle of that. So we're really limiting people on how they can defend themselves against, again, a criminal who doesn't care. Whether they bought their firearm, from somebody on the street or had it from before this and didn't turn in their higher capacity magazines, somebody who's going to commit a crime is going to commit a crime. And it's the people that are going to purchase their handguns and follow the rules and get these compliant magazines who we're really putting at risk and in danger by doing something like this.
So what would you suggest to those who are concerned about these two pieces of legislation? What would you recommend that they go about voicing their opinions? Because obviously we're in a little different scenario than we've been in past years. Everything's virtual.
Yep.
what would you suggest to those folks?
A couple things. One, you need to contact your legislators. But before you contact your legislators, there is going to be a committee hearing next week. And it already has been announced that these bills will be heard in committee. The chair of the committee has also said that when the allotted time for this committee is done, it's done. They're not going to extend it. If there's 5 people or if there's 50 people still waiting to speak, they will not be permitted to speak. The meeting will end at the time that it's supposed to end. So you need to send your emails, call your legislators, call and leave voicemails for the members of the Judiciary Committee, and then sign up. Sign up early and register to participate in those committee hearings because they are going to cut off members of the public who want to speak both for and against this bill by setting a finite time limit for this committee hearing.
Well, Senator, appreciate it as always. Thank you for coming over and discussing these bills with me today and with our constituents at home.
Absolutely, and we all work for all of you out there. If there's a concern that you have about these pieces of legislation or anything else that's out there right now, contact us. We're very available, whether it's on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, our email address, phone here to Legislative Hall. We are here to work for you. We're here to listen to your concerns, whether or not we agree with you. There are some people that are going to support these bills. There are some people that are going to oppose these bills. We want to hear your reasonings for either supporting or not supporting the pieces of legislation that come to us every single week that we have to make decisions on. So thank you all very much for listening. Thank you for participating in this great process that we have here in Delaware, and I hope everybody has a safe week.
Yep, thank you. See you next week.
Thanks.